Elliot Graves never believed in childhood monsters until the scratching started inside his walls. At first, it was just a noise, faint and harmless, but by the fifth night, it was whispering his name from the dark. Now, every shadow in his apartment moves when he doesn't, and every reflection smiles when he isn't. Whatever the bugaboo is, it is not hiding anymore, and Elliot is starting to realize it has been living inside him all along. I still remember the first night it came. I had just moved into that old apartment at the edge of town, a place no one seemed to want, but the rent was cheap and the landlord seemed eager to fill it. The building smelled faintly of mildew and old paint, a scent that clung to my clothes even after hours of airing out the rooms. The floors creaked with every step, the walls groaned with every gust of wind, and the dim light from the street lamps barely reached past the windows. At first I told myself that the scratching I heard behind the walls was nothing, just rats, maybe, or the pipes settling. But the noise was precise, deliberate, almost like someone was tapping their fingernails against the plaster, counting each beat. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was exhausted from the move, that my imagination was exaggerating ordinary sounds into something sinister. Lying in bed, I noticed the shadows first. They seemed heavier than they should have been, lingering in the corners and stretching unnaturally across the ceiling. When I blinked, they didn't disappear. They twisted, shifting slowly as though they had life of their own. My heart pounded every time I caught them moving just beyond the edge of my vision. The scratching continued, a soft, persistent rhythm that made my teeth ache. I tried to focus on my breathing, tried to remind myself that nothing was there, but the feeling of being watched grew impossible to ignore. Then I noticed the smell. It started as faint, almost sweet like decaying fruit, but it grew stronger with every passing hour. I followed it around the apartment, peering under furniture and behind doors, but I found nothing. Still, it lingered, clinging to the corners, curling in the air like smoke. I began to feel it in my chest, an almost physical presence that pressed against my ribs, slowing my breath. By midnight, the scratching became more insistent. It moved from wall to wall like something small and determined was pacing behind the plaster. I tried to focus on the familiar sounds of the city outside, but they seemed muted, swallowed by the weight of the apartment's silence. I got up, my bare feet cold against the floor, and followed the sound. It led me to the kitchen, to the dark corner beneath the sink. The smell was strongest there. I reached out, my fingers trembling, but found nothing. And then I saw the first sign of it, something I could not ignore, a tiny black shape skittering across the floor, disappearing behind the refrigerator before I could focus on it. My chest tightened, a cold sweat covering my back. I knew in that instant that whatever it was not a normal creature. It was patient, it was watching, and it was waiting. I backed away slowly, but the shadow seemed to press closer, twisting along the walls, curling around my feet, and the scratching grew louder, sharper, more deliberate. My stomach turned as I realized the horrifying truth. I was not alone. Something had arrived in my apartment that night. Something that thrived in the darkness, something small and patient that I could neither see fully nor escape from. And as I stood there, frozen, I heard it. The faintest whisper of a sound that made my blood run cold. A soft, wet scraping, almost like a fingernail dragging slowly across the wall, coming from right behind me. I dared not turn around, knowing the moment I did, I might see what was waiting, and that whatever it was, it would not let me go. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat on the edge of my bed until the first hint of daylight touched the curtains, waiting for the scratching to stop, but it never did. It only softened, like whatever was behind the walls had decided to rest too. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that it was exhaustion or stress playing tricks on me. When morning finally arrived, I searched every inch of the apartment. I moved furniture, checked under the sink, even lifted floorboards in the hallway. I found nothing but dust, cobwebs, and the faintest trails of black residue smeared along the walls. I rubbed it between my fingers. It felt like ash, but colder, as if it had been burned and frozen at the same time. Throughout the day, the apartment seemed unusually quiet. No creaking floors, no whispering wind through the cracks, no scratching. For a moment, I felt relief. I opened all the windows, letting sunlight in, trying to banish whatever heaviness had settled in the place. But as the light faded and the long shadows began to stretch across the floor again, I could feel it, something shifting. The air grew heavy, the silence deeper. My heartbeat felt louder in the stillness, echoing through my ears like a drum. I sat on the couch, trying to read, but my eyes kept drifting to the corners of the room. I started to notice small movements like tiny shapes darting along the edges of my vision. Whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. The smell returned, too, faint but unmistakable, that same sweet, rotting scent. It made me nauseous, but I couldn't trace its source. I sprayed air freshener, lit a candle, opened the windows again, but the smell grew thicker, denser, as if mocking my efforts. That night, as I lay in bed, the scratching returned. Louder, closer. It wasn't coming from the walls anymore. It was coming from the ceiling, directly above me. Each scrape sent vibrations through the plaster like nails dragging slowly along the beams. I stared up into the dark, watching as tiny specks of dust drifted down from above. My mind raced with every possible explanation, but none felt right. The sounds were too deliberate, too rhythmic. I sat up, unable to take it any longer, and shined my phone's flashlight toward the ceiling. The beam trembled as I aimed it upward. For a second, I saw nothing. Then something moved. A shape, small and impossibly fast, skittered across the ceiling and vanished into the shadows. My breath caught in my throat. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The scratching stopped suddenly, replaced by silence so thick it rang in my ears. I forced myself to lie back down, pulling the blanket over me like it could offer protection. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, waiting for another sound, another movement, anything. But nothing came. The silence was worse than the noise. My eyelids grew heavy, my exhaustion dragging me toward sleep. Just before I drifted off, I heard it again, a faint rustling, not from the ceiling this time, but from under my bed. A slow, deliberate movement, as if something was crawling out from the darkness to breathe beside me. I woke up drenched in sweat, my sheets tangled tightly around my body. For a moment, I couldn't tell if it was morning or still night. The room was dim, the curtains drawn shut, and the air felt heavy, damp with that same sickly sweetness that clung to everything. My throat burned as I swallowed, my tongue tasting something metallic, something wrong. I sat up slowly, my eyes darting toward the floor. The sound from last night still echoed in my head, the crawling, the rustling beneath the bed. My chest tightened as I leaned over the edge, shining my phone's flashlight into the darkness below. Empty. Dust, old socks, and shadows. But as I exhaled in relief, I saw it, tiny black marks etched into the floorboards. They looked like scratches, but too narrow and precise, as if made by something with small, sharp claws. I reached down to touch them. The wood was rough, almost splintered and warm, as if the scratches were fresh. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled my hand back quickly and sat frozen, staring at the marks. Throughout the day, the apartment felt wrong in ways I couldn't explain. The air was stale no matter how many windows I opened. The lights flickered faintly, buzzing in the corners. My reflection in the mirror began to look strange, dull, slightly off-center, as though it wasn't reflecting me perfectly. When I leaned closer, I noticed tiny black specks under my eyes, almost like insect legs pressed just beneath the skin. I blinked, rubbed them away, and when I looked again, they were gone. By evening, the scratching began again. It was different this time, faster, restless, like something pacing the walls, searching. I pressed my ear against the plaster and immediately pulled back. The sound wasn't coming from inside the wall. It was behind me. I turned slowly, the room dimly lit by the single lamp on my desk. The air felt colder now, as if something had drawn the warmth out of it. The shadows trembled, moving slightly even though there was no breeze. I walked backward until I reached the far wall, keeping my eyes on the floor. Then I saw it. A small black shape about the size of a mouse scuttled out from under the bed. Its movements were unnatural, too quick, its limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. I froze, my breath caught halfway in my chest. The creature paused, its tiny head twitching toward me. It had no eyes, no face at all, just a smooth, oily surface that reflected light like wet glass. It crawled forward slowly, its legs clicking softly against the floorboards. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My mind raced for something to grab, something to defend myself with, but I couldn't move. I blinked once and it was gone, vanished. The scratching stopped too, leaving the apartment completely silent again. I forced myself to breathe, to believe I was hallucinating, that exhaustion had finally broken me. But when I finally dared to glance at the wall, I saw them. Hundreds of tiny black fingerprints smeared across the white paint, leading from the floor to the ceiling as if dozens of small hands had been crawling their way toward me all night long. By the fourth night, I could no longer tell what was real and what wasn't. My phone battery died hours ago, and I was too afraid to move toward the charger near the bed. The room felt alive, breathing in quiet pulses, every corner trembling with invisible motion. I hadn't eaten all day. I couldn't. The smell of decay had grown unbearable, filling every inch of the apartment with that heavy sweetness, like flowers left to rot. It wasn't coming from the walls anymore. It was coming from me. My skin itched constantly, a deep crawling beneath the surface, as though something was moving inside. I scratched until my fingers bled, but it only made the sensation worse. I stopped looking at my reflection because it didn't match me anymore. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of my face twitching slightly out of sync, a lag between my movements and its response. The scratching had become constant now. It came from everywhere. Walls, floor, ceiling, even the insides of furniture. The rhythm was uneven, chaotic, as if dozens of tiny claws were dragging themselves closer. I tried stuffing my ears with tissues, but I could still feel it vibrating in my bones. The lights flickered violently, the bulbs humming as if about to burst. In those brief flashes, I thought I could see shapes in the room. Thin, hunched silhouettes pressed against the corners, their limbs too long, their heads tilted at impossible angles. Every time the light blinked out, they were gone. But when it returned, they were closer. I began marking the walls with a knife, carving small crosses every few feet, hoping it would somehow protect me. The plaster crumbled beneath my hands, revealing thin lines of darkness, like veins running through the building. I pressed my ear against one of them and instantly recoiled. From within the wall came a faint, wet breathing, slow and deliberate. Something was alive in there, something that knew I was listening. My sanity started to unravel with every hour that passed. I thought about leaving, but when I tried to open the door, the knob was ice cold and it wouldn't turn. My keys were gone, my phone dead, my world reduced to this suffocating room filled with movement and decay. I began to whisper to myself, just to hear a human sound, but even my voice seemed foreign, distant. Then came the sound that broke me, the laughter. High-pitched and wet, it bubbled from the walls, echoing in overlapping tones, like multiple voices trying to imitate human joy. It was wrong, too fast, too distorted. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it only grew louder, surrounding me, vibrating through the floor. I screamed until my throat burned, but the laughter drowned everything out. When it finally stopped, the silence that followed was worse. I looked toward the bed, and that's when I saw it. The sheets had shifted. forming the shape of a small body lying beneath them. It wasn't breathing, but it moved. Slowly, the blanket began to sink inward, as though something invisible was crawling underneath it, coming toward the edge, coming toward me. My body locked in place, unable to move or breathe, as the faint outline of a hand pressed upward through the fabric, reaching, stretching, fingers trembling just inches from the floor where I stood. I don't remember falling asleep. Maybe I never did. Maybe the exhaustion finally blurred the edges of my fear until time stopped mattering. When I opened my eyes, the apartment was drenched in red light from the dawn seeping through the blinds. The shape under the blanket was gone. The bed was empty. For a moment, I thought it was over. I thought maybe the nightmare had ended with the sunrise, but then I noticed the floor. Black smears leading away from the bed, streaking toward the hallway, like something had crawled out of the sheets during the night. My hands trembled as I followed the marks. They led to the bathroom door, which stood slightly open. The smell was overwhelming now, a sick mixture of decay and iron. The walls near the door were damp, dark liquid dripping slowly from the corners. I pushed the door open with shaking fingers. Inside, the mirror was fogged over, the sink filled with water that rippled faintly, though nothing had touched it. I stared into the glass, waiting for my reflection to appear through the condensation. It didn't. The fog cleared slowly, but the face that stared back wasn't mine. Its skin was pale and stretched thin, its mouth open too wide, and from the hollow sockets where its eyes should have been, tiny black insects spilled out, crawling down the glass in thick streams. I stumbled back, my shoulder hitting the wall, and the reflection smiled. The surface of the mirror rippled like water, and for a split second, I saw dozens of figures moving behind it. Small, hunched things with thin arms and twitching heads, pressing their faces against the other side of the glass. They were trapped there, staring out, waiting for something. Then I saw my own reflection again, but it wasn't moving with me. It blinked a second too late. Its head tilted in the wrong direction. Slowly, it raised one hand and pointed toward my chest. The itching started again. Worse this time. My skin burned from the inside, like fire beneath the flesh. I tore at my shirt, clawing at myself until I felt something hard beneath the surface. I looked down and saw a thin black shape pushing up from under my skin, writhing like a worm desperate to escape. I screamed and stumbled toward the sink, trying to pull it out, but my reflection only watched, grinning wider as more of them began to squirm beneath my skin, tiny silhouettes wriggling along my arms, up my neck, across my face. I fell to the floor, gasping, every nerve on fire. The scratching wasn't in the walls anymore. It was inside me, beneath my ribs, behind my eyes, under my fingernails. I could feel them moving, hundreds of them, crawling in unison. The laughter returned, louder than ever, echoing through my skull. I looked toward the mirror one last time, and I saw them, tiny black creatures spilling out of the reflection, crawling into the room, climbing onto me, merging with my skin. The last thing I felt before everything went dark was their cold, sticky hands pulling me toward the glass. When I opened my eyes again, the apartment was silent. The smell was gone. The scratching had stopped. I stood in front of the mirror, and for a long moment I couldn't recognize my own face. My skin was smooth, perfect, untouched. But behind the glass, in the faint shimmer of reflection, dozens of tiny shapes moved, pressing against the surface, waiting. I smiled without meaning to, realizing what I'd become.